Okay, guys, welcome to another edition of React Today as part of the World's Whale project. Since our last edition, there's many things that has happened. It's very difficult just to go and try to find one at a time. But what we are seeing here right now in the United States of Israel is that somebody else is dictating policy for the President of the United States, and it's not the government. And if the government is what the President of the United States wants to be, he's becoming like he showed on the F-16. The last time the people criticized him marching against him was that he's going to crap on everybody. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's crapping in American people, and he's crapping all around the world because he thinks he's better than anybody else. And we, the people, have no right to opinion, and we have no right to gathering. Everything that is against the First Amendment in the Constitution of that country, which is being applied in Australia and in the Western tradition, as I have mentioned before. The Western tradition is not the Western tradition anymore. It has been usurped. It has been taken over. It's been coup d'etat by another entity, and we know what entity that is. It's no else than the State of Israel. We cannot be shy about that. What is Canada doing? We still enjoy some liberties here in Canada. We still can gather. We still can march, even if it's on the walkways. Yes, but we still can speak and talk about what we don't like, even though persecution and amonestations and arrest has happened, like happened to Eves, the new candidate for the NDP. And if things keep going like this, I don't think Donald Trump is going to finish his mandate. I'm really not very sure that he's going to finish his mandate. And the problem is that for him, democracy is no more. Democracy is the problem. I told this to many people before. I have made programs about the problem with democracy is democracy for many years. And the problem with democracy, it was not that the corruption in the democratic government of the Western tradition, and including all the Western tradition, 27 countries in the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States of Israel, and yeah, we are not represented by anybody but the rich and the elites. And these elites are political and corporate, and everything in between the two, because now, of course, we know that the revolving door is just a regular symptom of what to do when the problem with democracy is democracy. What I meant by that was that democracy was corrupt and that democracy doesn't exist itself because it cannot be implemented when corporations, super rich people, and many others come together to make impossible that democracy, which has been the case since democracy was invented or came to terms in the Republic, according to Plato. You remember that what is justice? Thrasymachus and Socrates is speaking, and Thrasymachus says justice is what is in the interest of the strong. In this case, the strong is the almighty corporations, the almighty Israel in America, because Israel is not almighty. It's almighty in corruption. And when corruption takes over democratic processes, then democracy is no more. That is the problem with democracy. That is why the problem with democracy has always been democracy itself, because democracy is not being representative. We need a more direct democracy, like those in the cantons in Switzerland, where people gather and get to the representative with the demands they need, not to ask him about something, but for the demands they need. When things are like that,
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Attorney General Pam Bondi's ordered the FBI to compile a list of what the Justice Department is calling domestic terrorist organizations. Last week, Bondi sent a memo to all federal prosecutors and law enforcement agencies targeting a wide range of people, including those who hold what she calls, quote, extreme views in favor of mass migration and open borders, adherence to radical gender ideology, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, or anti-Christianity, unquote. The memo also targets people who show, quote, hostility towards traditional views on family, religion, and morality, unquote. The investigative journalist Ken Klippenstein published a copy of Bondi's memo on his Substack page on Saturday. Klippenstein notes Bondi's language echoes a national security presidential memorandum issued by President Trump known as NSPM 7 to target nonprofits and activists. Trump signed the directive in September in the wake of the murder of right-wing activist Charlie Kirk. Ken Klippenstein, thanks so much for being with us from Madison, Wisconsin. Why don't you tell us how you got a hold of this memo?
Well, it was provided to me by somebody who I can't really say much more than had access to it. And what it was an implementation order for that NSPM 7 directive from President Trump, which essentially targets anyone who isn't MAGA. At first, I looked at it and thought, oh, this is targeting the left. But then you see these so-called indicators of terrorism, things like anti-Christian sentiment, anti-American sentiment. And I realized that's not just the left. That's anyone who isn't a Trump supporter.
So explain the significance of this, Ken Klippenstein.
It essentially takes NSPM 7, which advances the view that a major threat of terrorism is coming from these, anti-Trump sentiments, and it puts it into effect. It uses tools available to the federal government and federal law enforcement in particular. For example, it directs the FBI to go through its past half decade or so of intelligence on Antifa and on some of these other groups I've been talking about, and tells them to make criminal cases around those and to circulate intelligence about it. And part of that intelligence production effort involves soliciting tips from the public, getting people to narc on their fellow citizens who are evincing this anti-Trump sentiment. So in one case, it tells the FBI to upgrade and kind of supercharge its tip system so that they can get this flow of information coming in from informants all over the country, reporting on threats like these.
You believe?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? It cut out for just a second.
Who is the architect of this memo, do you believe, of the NSPM 7?
I would say it's not a person so much as an incident, which was the murder of Charlie Kirk. As national security officials described to me shortly after the murder, the very next day there was a war room convened by the White House. And I think kind of unofficially taking point on this was President Trump's Homeland Security advisor, Stephen Miller. And he kind of orchestrated, along with all these other national security appointees, how are we going to respond to this? And the decision was made that we would make anti-Trump sentiment tantamount to this terrorist threat, and we were going to prosecute it as such. So I guess I would say, if I was to point to one single person, I would say Stephen Miller.
Dismiss 3 Democratic members of the Consumer Product Safety Commission.
Well, I think Caroline answered this question in the briefing today. The president is the head of the executive branch, and it's the president's prerogative to ensure that all executive branch employees are the best, the brightest, the most committed to fulfilling the agenda that they have, whether it be in their agency or any post in government.
Is the president going to replace them?
Well, again, we'll take a look at the situation, but the important thing is, I'll take a look at the specifics that you're talking about here, but the important thing to understand is that we don't just let people stay in their jobs just because they were always there, right? We have to examine the performance of specific employees, whether they're doing the best that they can do. I know that in particular, as a parent, there's been lots of concerns that I've had, that my family's had about product safety in this country. We can absolutely do better, and we will do better, but that requires hiring the best people for the job. And President Trump will always hire the best people for the job. Yes.
But this is really an attitude held by a lot of people in the administration, which I think is genuine fear in the wake of that shooting, that something like that might happen to them. And so we have to create a response. And what that is essentially the same sort of response to 9/11. But in this case, it's directed at Americans.
Ken, is money involved with this?
Yeah, absolutely. So it directs the Treasury Department to audit taxes and to try to find, the administration seems convinced that there's some shadowy foreign group or financiers for a lot of the sentiments I was describing before, and Antifa in particular. And so it authorizes them to go through nonprofits' taxes, and to try to find evidence of something which there's no public evidence exists.
But is there a reward being offered, like if someone calls an FBI tip line?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's another thing that this implementation order directs. It provides for a funding system to reward people that provide these tips that I was describing before. It's basically a bounty system for anti-Trump thought and reporting on it.
And it goes back retroactively 5 years?
Yeah, the FBI right now, pursuant to this order, is digging through all of its intelligence to find whatever they can, going back to the Biden administration, that can be used to help make these cases.
So the memo targets organizations, not only formal NGOs, but also book clubs, community, mutual networks, mutual aid networks, online forums.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it uses the phrase organizations and entities, which can mean individuals. So again, it can't be overstated how sweeping a directive like this is. This isn't targeted, and to the extent that it's being reported as directed at Antifa, I think it's important to remember, Antifa may not exist as such, but it includes a lot more than that. It also describes people opposed to immigration enforcement, which if you look at polling is like, the way in which immigration enforcement has been rolled out under this administration, that could describe half the country or more of it. So this is really much bigger than just Antifa. And to the extent that Antifa means anything, the administration defines it in its own way, which is different than how a lot of people would define Antifa. So it's really important to understand that. I
mean, we just did a segment on the Pentagon bombing boats without evidence of them being, as the Trump administration calls them, narco-terrorists. They're talking about foreign terrorists, so-called. So here you're talking about a domestic terrorist network. Are we talking about no trial, no paid-for accusations? How does this work?
Yeah, I mean, the business of counterterrorism is a very ugly business. It is essentially pre-crime in the sense that you are authorized to go and make investigations without the usual predicate that you would need of someone having committed a crime or finding evidence that suggests someone committed a crime. In counterterrorism, the theory behind it is that the threat is so great that we need to suspend those ordinary evidentiary standards for premising an investigation. And instead, all you need are these so-called indicators. And the Trump administration is defining those indicators as a lot of these groups we've just been describing, which can apply to millions and millions of Americans. These are very mainstream views, opposition to immigration enforcement and the way in which it's been carried out this year. So the dragnet has gotten far wider. I mean, after 9/11, these tools were pointed at groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And to, unfortunately, some extent, just American Muslims caught up in this dragnet. But they've widened this to include far larger sets of people. And so what we're really seeing is the global war on terror coming home and becoming a domestic war on terror.
Ken Klippenstein, I want to thank you for being with us, investigative reporter.
Perhaps the most famous institution throughout the history of East Germany was its secret police force, the Ministry for State Security, better known as the Stasi. Now, the Stasi are well known mostly because of how incredibly effective they were at their jobs. That being the suppression of dissent, spying on the broader East German population and conducting espionage across the Western world. But how did the Stasi work? Where did it come from and what happened to it after the reunification of Germany? Well, the Stasi was founded in 1950, 1 year after East Germany itself, with a man called Wilhelm Seisser at the helm. Seisser tried to remove the East German First Secretary Walter Ulbricht in 1953 but failed and so was himself ousted. He was replaced by Ernst Wollweber, who was shortly afterwards replaced himself by Erich Mielke, who kept his job until 1989. All three of these men were former Soviet intelligence agents and were seen to be loyal to Moscow. Which was the point. The intelligence agencies founded across the Eastern Bloc at this point were first and foremost loyal to the centre of the communist world and not their own nations. The Stasi was founded not to protect East Germany itself, but to protect the interests of the Socialist Unity Party therein, although those in charge would have undoubtedly argued that those were the same thing. In fact, one of the issues the Stasi had at the beginning of its inception was that it could only recruit fresh people and not intelligence veterans. Why? Well, because all of Germany's previous intelligence officers had worked for the Third Reich and thus were seen as untrustworthy. So how was the Stasi organised? Well, Mielke stood at the top of the Stasi and reported directly to the communist leadership from the Stasi headquarters in East Berlin. Most of its operations were focused on East Germany itself except for one section, the HVA, which conducted international espionage. This was mostly focused on West Germany and ultimately this is something the Stasi were very good at. It operated its own well-trained guards unit, maintained jails for political prisoners, and spied on soldiers to make sure none of them disagreed with the government. Of course, the Stasi's primary role was to spy on the East German population, and boy did it. At its height in the 1980s, the Stasi had over 90,000 official employees backed up by several 100,000 informants out of a population of just over 16 million. Those who complained too often or were seen as being outright hostile to the communist leadership would often find themselves as political prisoners. The Stasi also routinely intercepted and monitored communications between people, especially those between East and West Germany. And it focused a lot of resources on catching people who were illegally consuming West German media. The level of surveillance in East Germany was remarkably high, and most citizens there were at some point or another on the receiving end of Stasi inquiries, which is why it was so hated by the East German population. Yet, despite staggering levels of surveillance, the Stasi were unable to prevent or predict the 1989 revolution. And the reason why was that they overestimated the commitment of everyday East Germans to communism. The Stasi assumed that membership of the Social Unity Party meant that a person liked communism, whereas actually people joined it to advance their careers. Thus, when Gorbachev left East Germany to its own devices and the people there started to demand reforms, the Stasi thought that it wouldn't go anywhere. Thus, when party members and leading officials started to demand change, particularly with respect to the security forces, the Stasi were blindsided. After reunification, those who would work for the Stasi were, for the most part, fired, and there were attempts to prosecute Stasi higher-ups, but the vast majority of these went nowhere. In 1990, the Stasi was disbanded, yet its legacy and the reputation of its workers is still fiercely debated in Germany today.
What you just saw, you might say that I'm trying to say something stupid. For what I'm saying, for what I just said, I can go to jail for indefinite periods, like I'm going to be arrested on administrative arrest, like the Israelis do with the Palestinians, for indefinite time. Is that going to happen in Canada too? Are we going to be afraid that somebody's going to come and arrest us because we have freedom of opinion and freedom of character and freedom to find what are the answers that we need to establish from our politicians in order to discover them as liars, corrupt, sold out, intransigent, and breaking the law and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and Freedoms in the case of Canada? And many other countries, like it's happened in Ireland recently. Now that Ireland gave more than $100 million, is not much compared to what the billions that the European Union and America are giving to Ukraine. But I didn't expect that from Ireland to cooperate with such amount for the lost war in Ukraine, which is another corruption abyss. When you become a politician, I don't want to become a politician. I want to become a leader or a citizen. Informed citizen that wants to take hand on politicians in order to displace them from their positions because they have not represented us but the oligarchies and the produce of capital. I'm not against capitalism as long as it doesn't have the power to corrupt the decision making of the public. And that is the problem with capital, that it doesn't matter where it comes from, as long as it's capital, whether it's brute. You have, like the Bracovia Camp, the crisis of 2008, and the many other banks that have laundering a lot of money from not only corporations, but from people that have desecrated the treasure of their own countries. It doesn't matter if the guy took the money, the whole country, as long as it's a lot of money, you're welcome in the Switzerland banks or in the fiscal paradises, etc., etc. That's the problem with capitalism. I don't have a problem if you invented something or you have a patent on something, but after you created that patent, you make it public and you get rich and the people benefit from it. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is when the people create patents that are invented because they have been denied by the Department of Patents or in the United States, and then these people got killed, the FBI intervened, their inventions and scriptures and diagrams and blueprints are taking over, their formulas and whatever they have come with, and all of a sudden, some guy appears and said, oh, he's a genius. And that genius, in the case of Mr. Musk, hasn't invented anything really. He might be very smart and all that stuff, but he's billionaire and the richest man in the world because he has been given contracts from public money, whether in the United States, Canada, Europe, in order to become super rich as long as he can support the administration goals, which is to keep protecting the super capitals that come from Israel, that come from the rich, like the Adelsons, for example. I didn't know until now, a few years ago, that the mafia of Las Vegas was taken over by the government because of the killings and assassinations and out-of-control issues of the mafia. No, just to give it to another mafia, which was the Lanskys of this time, which are the Adelsons, which have made their fortune with casinos, which is nothing but a thievery of the people that get addicted to gambling, and which are millions. So when you're asking about moral ground initiatives, or you're talking about the principles of truth, when you're talking about how deep the absence of the sacred, a book that was written in the 90s by Jerry Mander, is so important now, because there is nothing of value in the world, not you or I, not the citizens, but whomever has capital. This principle that I only care for myself and myself only is self-destructive and is going to end up imploding in the world. That's why they're changing the atmosphere. Bill Gates and all these super rich people are going to end up killing each other because there can only be one. And as long as there can only be one, they're going to end up killing each other. The Zuckerbergs, all these families, the Bezos, and all this Zionist attitude, which is, I have the money, I can corrupt, it's done as I say, is the rest we're going to destroy. It's not going to happen. Revolution is at hand in the United States. That's my opinion. That's what I think. That's what's going to happen. President Trump is not going to finish his term, and I'm asking for the last time this week, for the last 10 years, where are our generals in the Western tradition? Where are our admirals? Where is the high ranks officials that promised and supported the Constitution after wars and blood and sweat and suffering and misery? What happened to you, generals, admirals, captains, colonels, soldiers that sworn to protect the country from foreign and within enemies within? According to Pamela, that woman, whatever her name is, Trump, Pamela Bondi, she has a name of a psychopath. Ted Bundy was a psychopath, so is she. She's putting all Americans, and they want to expand this law to all the Western tradition. And that law is, if you speak against us, we're going to get you, arrest us. Where are they going to put all those people? To start like in concentration camps, like they did with the First Nations before and during the conquest of Africa, assassinating, killing, devastating, and not recognizing that genocide is not a particularity that is happening in Gaza by the Israeli state. Listen, the wars for independence are back in America, in Canada, in the Western tradition especially. And that doesn't make me a communist, that makes me a realist. But apparently, being a realist is to become an enemy of the state. This is unacceptable. Here in Canada, we have lost that, and bills, Bill 13, Bill C11, Bill C63, that are trying to stop us from speaking, from gathering, from getting along, from understanding that the problem with capitalism is capitalism. I'm not against capitalism. I'm against the abuse of capitalism when it takes over what is normal, what is usual, which is these communities. Every community in Canada and the United States, in the Western Ontario, has to be prosper. And that is not happening when a foreign entity which interest is to take global accommodations for their only and one and only vision for the world, which only the rich are the strong, because of their power of corruption, because of the power to buy generals, to put them cushy, as Colonel Douglas MacGregor